Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Micro-Frontends in the Trenches. Today we have a special guest, Natalia Venditto, directly from Microsoft. She's, let me read it correctly, Principal Product Owner of JavaScript at Microsoft, as you can see also in the overlay. And Natalia and I, it's been a while that we know each other. We met at several stages around the world. I remember in Amsterdam was the first time that we met at the Frontend Developer Love Conference. Now it evolved. And is let's say the conference is changing, but it's been a while that we know each other. We share the passion of sharing with the community. Moreover, Natalia also speaks different languages, including Italian. So next time, Natalia, we need to do this one in Italian.
Certo.
How are you today, Natalia?
I'm doing great. How are you, Luca? I'm super glad to be
I
here.
can't complain at all. I'm super excited to have you here today because I know that you can share a lot of insights for everyone that is listening. So, first of all, I will start as every time. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself, what you are doing, how you started with Micro-Frontends?
Okay, so about me as a person, I can tell you, I am a third generation Italian, and this is why I speak Italian. Although it's a little bit dormant in my brain. When I go to Italy, the first hours I'm like super quiet, and then after a while I start picking it up again. I was born in Uruguay. But I live in Barcelona for the latest 20 years, 22 years. And yes, I have a career in software development, in web development for, about the same time, since I think early 2000s. I've been anything from a webmaster of the times back in the day to being focused in front-end development specifically, then more full stack. Then I started doing more of architecture consultancy and designs for our customers and implementation because I've always been very hands-on. Then I had a I would say, 8 months, I think I was working for MongoDB, that I was very, very focused on databases. And now for the last 3 years, I work at Microsoft. Like you said very well, I own the JavaScript developer experience and developer tools. We call it end-to-end. That's our team, the end-to-end tools, tooling and experiences. We kind of make sure that developers have a great time, that they have everything they need from their code editor, which in this case is VS Code, typically from GitHub as well, all the actions to create their pipelines, and then finally they can run their code and debug it and observe it and do all the things that we developers do with code, but very, very focused on the JavaScript language. Yeah, so that's
nice. That sounds super awesome. The next question is, when did you encounter in your journey Micro-Frontends? Because obviously, I know that you have done a lot for the community, so I'm eager to hear your first encounter.
So in 2018, I was working in the migration of a very large enterprise platform for a global leading brand that is, it's a German brand, but they have, I think at that time there were 3 platforms with 3 verticals. Some code was very legacy, some code was newer, and we were trying to consolidate and create a new architecture and new definitions. And because we had so many projects, it was about 700 projects that were localized. So in the end, it was thousands of websites. But we wanted to have a common central design system that we could theme specifically for each one of those sub brands of this massive enterprise. And this is when I started thinking about micro-frontends. Okay, so we moved some stuff to microservices, to the cloud. At that moment, they were on premises. We started like kind of lifting and shifting parts of the infrastructure. but I wanted to modernize the front end. And this is when I started looking into micro-frontends, when I started experimenting, researching, testing tools. This is when I came across also Module Federation that wasn't even a stable release at the time, because I'm talking about, I think it was Webpack 4, but probably even, it was the very, very earlier releases of all those technologies that enable what we can do today. It wasn't, I don't think half of it was possible back in the day. We probably experimented a lot and got some things right, some things wrong, but we learned tons. And this is when I started thinking, okay, this is something that I want to share with the community, so they can maybe benefit or at least understand what some of us are doing in that space.
For sure. I mean, I strongly believe in the community. I strongly believe in people like us that were pioneering the architecture, that are able to share the wins and the loses during the journey, because at the end is a journey, right? So it's not that we were born with this gift of designing distributed system or front end. So we learn as everyone else, with a lot of hours in the trenches, trying and failing and succeeding and so on.
Absolutely. What people see is the tip of the iceberg, right? And then because maybe those are the learnings that are beneficial to share, and you don't have to to spend a lot of time explaining the parts where you cried and where things didn't work, where everything broke. But that's part of succeeding or failing, but in the end, learning.
Totally.
Like you said.
Totally. I fully agree. One thing that you have done that I'm really curious to understand, let's say, kicked off this project is the website of MicroFrontends. If I remember well, microfrontends.dev, right?
That's correct. Microfrontend.dev. So I was learning a lot. I was having sometimes conversations in private, sometimes in public. Sometimes I was sharing through blog posts or whatever. I tried different platforms, DevDat2, I don't remember, Medium. I started trying to, share this information with others. And at some point I realized that sometimes when I was having those private conversations, typically sometimes with customers, I wanted to refer to something that I had previously discovered, but I didn't have a central place to refer them to. So this is when I said, like, you know what? I have so much information in my head. Instead of every time having the same conversation or repeating myself, I'm going to just try to document it in a way that it's public and that I can link others to when they ask me a question, or what's my opinion on a certain technology, or what's my experience, or what do I recommend. So this is how micro-frontend.dev was born. And my intention was to open source it. I wanted to have collaboration and contribution. And it's still in my pipeline, let's say. I do want to do that, but I recognize that contributing to an open source platform that is dedicated to spreading information can be time demanding, time consuming. Of course, I want to let everybody who wants to share anything in that domain be part, but that also requires that I spend time reviewing what people contribute, which is fair, because in the end, I want to make sure that the information is accurate, or at least the most accurate possible. I don't mean to imply that everything I say there is the truth, but it's at least it comes from experience and experimentation again, and kind of practical know-how. And that's something I cannot do today. So I decided to postpone that aspect of micro-frontend.dev until I can commit some of my time to make sure that everything I share there and others share there through it is well reviewed and takes and gets from me what it deserves, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, the resources is awesome because you packed inside that web page is quite a lot of knowledge, quite a lot of opinions and techniques in order to embrace micro-frontends. And one thing that caught my attention is the assessment tool that you created, like the feature slider that you are basically taking into account the architectural characteristics, what people call non-functional requirements. I'm not a big fan of this term because I believe that are more architectural characteristics. Otherwise, we have like a negative idea about that. Instead, they are extremely important. But tell us a bit more how it works and what is the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, and that's great feedback, because sometimes only when you discuss with other experts in your domain, you get these ideas. Oh, well, I never thought about it. It's like such a broadly adopted term, non-functional requirement. But if I see it from your perspective, I think you're totally right. So maybe I'll consider renaming that. Yeah, so that tool, I have the conviction that every single solution we adopt has pros and cons, and it's a trade-off. Like, there is no bulletproof solution that is going to solve all our problems and not give us a little bit of work in, or that cause maybe problems in another areas. That's I haven't come across any of that in 20 years in this in this industry. So what I wanted to do is give people the ability to, before they go and say, yeah, I need micro-frontend, I'm going to go with this solution and I'm going to invest the time and blah blah blah, to make them think about, do I really need this? What I have today for my use case, for the problem I want to solve, isn't really enough. Do I need to go with this different approach? And I thought that was a fun way to make them think a little bit about the potential, downsides or upsides, but that there are trade-offs to every solution
Absolutely. And so, from your
apply.
perspective, when would you recommend, for instance, micro-frontends for a project? There are some, I don't know, signals that usually tells you, oh yes, this is absolutely a project that will must be done with micro-frontends.
You need to start by investigating the organization. This is something that I always recommend, because this is not a solution that will solve technical problems. In essence, every micro frontend has in its encapsulated space the same problems than any other project, right? What we are trying to solve with this is potentially at an organizational level, how we progress a large platform. I think that you need to be at a certain level of, or at a certain grade of qualification of a project. I think that it's more geared towards enterprise solutions, towards large platforms that have many different concerns that are solved with different projects and then require different schedules for or development cycles, different release cycles, different deployment techniques, or even spaces, right? Maybe you want to deploy part of your architecture as a container, and then another part is a simple static application. And these are the things. So I would start by, how is what's the length of, or the size of my platform? What parts cause me the most problems to align? Like, for example, I have this part of the platform that I'm constantly evolving, developing. It's on active development, or it's even being added new features or capabilities. And then I have this other part that is pretty much untouched. Maybe I start there. I decouple those two. So obviously we have a backend decoupling, and then we have a front end part. Do we want to make sure that those two parts still are developed in the same way? Then maybe we need to extract that as an additional layer, think of it as a design system, and start splitting components apart and developing them in isolation. And because some of them may require that we deploy them more often to update them, and some of them not, then this is when we start like kind of undoing this Lego figurine that you can think in your head. And instead of building it, we can think about extracting things. And this is how I think about the micro-frontends approach. We start by looking at how we develop software or a web platform. What are the teams? What are the cycles? And then this is when we start thinking more about the components in and out of themselves and how they can exist as separate entities from one another, with, of course, an orchestration layer to, in the end, consolidate a deployment, a project as a single unit, because this is what you want to offer your customers. They don't need to know how we stitch things together. They hopefully they should never know that or perceive that this connection between components that are independently developed and deployed.
I really love how you answer this question and explain why. Because I was in Berlin for the MicroFrontends conference literally a few weeks ago, and we were discussing with Michael Gear and Florian Rappel about what are the challenges. Because now, it's almost 10 years that MicroFrontends are let's say, available.
Yeah.
And slowly but steadily, I started to see, let's say, more maturity, and we agree on this thing. But everyone was starting with, it's not a technical challenge. We need to think about the platform, we need to think about the organization, we need to think about that. And I was super pleased to hear that, because it's not something that I hear too often in organization, because they think it's just like we slice this application in multiple chunks and that's it. So we have MicroFrontends. But it's always an afterthought, thinking about the platform part, thinking about these kind of topics. I will link in the description also the video on YouTube about the MicroFrontends conference, where we discuss about this stuff. So if you want to, let's say, watch further, you will have also that reference. And before we close up with this topic of the microfrontend.dev website, what is behind the future of this website? Are you planning, let's say, a new announcement on top, obviously, on open sourcing when you will have time? But do you have, let's say, other ideas behind that at the moment?
Well, I have an invitation from a close friend who is working on a new approach to micro-frontends that I am pretty excited about. And I am hoping to participate of it, to understand it better, and to document it in the website. And hopefully I also have find the time to evolve certain topics, because this industry we work on, this ecosystem is so dynamic, and it's always progressing, and it's always changing, and even some of my opinions change over time. And I think that's a good thing, right? You acquire new knowledge and new experiences, and then sometimes you change your mind about certain topics, or you want to speak more about them. So I know that I have this space where I can go and review my own evolution as a technologist, and it's great. So yes, there is a future for it, and I'm hoping to find time soon to invest.
Amazing.
In it.
Good to hear for everyone, I guess. Okay, so let's turn a bit the topic into something else. So I remember, so you know that I'm following you quite closely on socials, because I think we share a lot of, let's say, topics like developer experience. We share the micro-frontends part, the front end, the cloud part. So I think there is a lot of overlaps in our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember at the QCon, you did a talk about composable architectures. Now, I think it's interesting, because I saw from my side a lot of names to describe distributed system on the front end. What I mean by that is, okay, there is this term micro-frontends, obviously, that well known, island architecture that is technically looking into, to a certain extent, an implementation of the same characteristics that are leveraged behind micro-frontends. In fact, for me, are inside the same umbrella. The implementation is a detail, but the principles are the same. So I was wondering if you can shed some light on the composable architecture and what you describe basically inside your talk.
Yes, so that's a really great question. And this may be where we don't share this the same opinion, where we don't overlap. I always question the name, the conventional name for micro-frontends, because when you think about something being micro, you think about something that is typically has a single concern. Like if I think of a microservice, I know, let's imagine it's a microservice for payments, like it's handling payments, and that's all it's doing. Like it handles my payments in my platform. However, a micro-frontend may be decomposed even further into smaller units. I do really like the atomic design approach, where we have the tiniest possible unit, which could be, for example, in a button, even the label or the icon. So I believe that is like a micro part, each one of those units. And then micro frontends can be anything from a single component that if it's attached to this payment service could be, I don't know, the payment button or the place where I put my credit card numbers or whatever. But that specific experience that is going to be part of a larger experience, or it could be a full vertical site because it's being handled by a full team that is concerned only with this experience inside of a larger scope. So micro frontends never was a term that I felt was right, but composable applications in the front end space, that was more aligned with my vision of how these architectures work. They can be composed and decomposed with smaller or larger units, but in the end, they are not necessarily micro all the time. And this is why I struggle with the term micro frontend, and I wanted to find a different way to refer to them. And because they are composable in my mind, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to decouple things if you cannot compose them back, because unless you just want to use that as a separate, very tiny experience, you're always going to compose it back. So composable front ends that are decoupled from a larger monolithic and tightly coupled application, that was the right term for me. And it's kind of complex, but I think it does represent what in my mind micro frontends are in the end. So yeah, then in that talk, I speak about something that I fully believe, that at this time, we should start always by designing in Figma what the experience looks like for the end user, because they should be our priority. And then from there, the API spec, and then from there, the backend, probably the logic, and from that logic all the way back to actually materializing those front-end components that are interactive for the user. So I see this cycle of the inner loop.
And do you, in your experience, you have worked mainly with cross-functional teams, or more with components teams, where you have a layer for the front end that is basically one team, a layer for the back end that is another team?
Well, I did everything. I did myself everything, like the backend and the front end. I have been part of front end teams that were only concerned about the front end and never touched anything that had to do with the backend. And I've also been part of cross-functional teams that where everything from the requirements gathering or requirements engineers to all the way to the testers um, in the same block or unit as a team. I think that last formation is the best, the most effective for a team to understand end to end an experience and coordinate it and actually get the most out of the development cycle.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, that sounds great, and thanks for the explanation. Everyone at the end has his own way. I like the fact that you merge the idea of composition. I think is quite an important aspect to look into that. And also is a key pillar when you're building a distributed system in general. That is, let's say, front and the back end. At the end of the day, it's a part of that is quite key in this case. There is another thing I'm curious though. So you are, as I said, I'm following you very closely because I love your content. So you were talking recently about generative AI. And is a buzzword right nowadays, right? So everyone is talking about generative AI, what it can do for developers, and so on. So I was wondering, what can generative AI do for micro-frontends, in your opinion, obviously?
Wow, that's a great question. But let me go back a little bit to composability because it's also linked. When we design a system to be composable, we force ourselves to make it more flexible. And I think that I see there are two streams of building front ends and front end applications and even front end frameworks and front end tools. The ones that say we will have this opinion and you have to go with it and this is how it is. And the one that is like, okay, we are going to give you an abstraction that you can then consume and build your own stuff. In the context of the application development itself, composability maps more to the extensible and less opinionated part. Why? Because if you design a platform that looks, or an experience, a front-end experience, a UI that looks like this today, but then you need to add stuff like AI in the future, this is where you can better integrate these new evolving technologies, emerging technologies that are proliferating everywhere. And this is exactly, I see an opportunity to add AI to everything. Just please don't build another chatbot. that's what it can really make an experience super rich if we take the time to understand the APIs that are available, how they work, the models, all the things that they can do. I think that there is so much to explore, and it was like that for me. So 1 year ago, I knew nothing about AI. Now I know a little bit more. I'm not an expert. I think that you need several years and many hours to become an expert on anything. But there is a great opportunity to even understand through AI how to better do that split that we were talking about earlier. How do we understand the user and what they're doing in a way that helps us decide what components go together, as opposed to those components that maybe we designed as part of a single unit, but maybe we could even split apart and treat differently because we made the wrong assessment that some micro frontend should be built in this way and needs all these parts, and it's not necessarily true. And this is where AI could really help us evaluate the usage of a component and enhance it in different ways. And of course, the APIs and models themselves to make experiences more interesting and dynamic and whatnot. Just not another chat. Just kidding.
No, totally. I agree with you. We have seen quite a few of them in the last few months.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think because it actually maps to customer support and to customer interaction, which is a concern for business and for many business units. How do I better connect to my customers? How do I make sure that I always have somebody available, right? And this is a very good way to always provide the user with a more interactive experience. But there are so many other interesting applications in the domains of summarization, document ingestion and analysis, the user behavior, so many things that we can improve through this customization, personalization, all these things. When they are AI powered, they become really, really powerful, by the way. So
I remember I was watching the keynote from Meta or the React team, and there was a very interesting demo of React Native with the creator of Expo, where he was leveraging AI for doing server UI rendering that I found very interesting. I will link the video in the description below, because I think it was the first time that I've seen a slightly different approach where Gen AI was used for, to a certain extent, guide the creation of the UI using obviously the React Native components that were available for that. But that opened, let's say, a lot of ideas after watching that video that I think is a very interesting approach that is different from what we have seen so far very often through chatbots and what you can do with that. So definitely.
absolutely. Yeah, in the domain of developer tools, that's my opinion on the actual user facing side of the application, right? But on the development tools, on the developer tools domain, we can, of course, think about guided or pilot guided development, where if we have a very large design system or components library, we are assisted into making the right decisions for that composability phase, right? So yeah, definitely lots of opportunities.
I agree with you. I think we are scratching the surface at the moment. There is way more rewards when we start to dive deep into this topic, definitely. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask you, can you tell me, let's say, 3 tips that you would share with anyone in the industry that is approaching micro-frontends today?
Okay, so evaluate what you have first. Know your pains. That's the important part, but not only your pains as a developer, because in the end, micro frontends, anything that is UI and UX related, is to serve the end user. So what are their pains? And then move to the next part. Do I think that if I split things apart and I treat parts of my application differently and I put them on a different cycle, it's going to solve some of those problems? Or the problems that I'm facing as a team, for example, where I want to release something, but I'm limited by other people's and other teams' schedules and so on. Once I have done that full evaluation, like we said, what's my org status, what's the end user experience, then only then I can make a good design. So I think those are the 3 tips in all chain. Start by analyzing the user experience and what you have today. Start by followed up by the organization of your teams, and then only move to the technology part and think, how can you leverage micro-frontends to make the experience better? Yeah. And if you can, right?
I think it's amazing because more people I'm interviewing in this series, and we end up always like try to check these few things, and I really like, because since the beginning of the journey, when I was designing microservices at the beginning, I always immediately recognized that these 3 aspects that you touched. So understand the context, understand the organization structure, the 4 convoys law, etc., and then start the development. I think are very true, especially for distributed system in general, because also in microservices, I see a lot of these, let's say, gotchas that are applied when we design distributed systems. So I love that every single person I'm interviewing are ending up towards this direction, because it's so true. And I feel that very often we forget about that because we embrace. There was recently a post I read on LinkedIn where there was a person say, "Oh, by the way, agile doesn't dictate that you don't have to have any plan up front, but you need to have a bit of design that you need to think about." Very often, I think that we are losing the art of designing system a bit in favor of let's rush towards an implementation. At the end of the day, is a micro thing, and therefore I like
Yeah.
very much what you said just now.
I think that because front end development and front end developers in general, which is a good thing because many of us are in the industry and are working in development because we got the door open through JavaScript and front end development. But many of us maybe learned by doing, and we're missing that part where we are doing something to solve a problem, not just to get something done, right? An application done. And that formal aspect of software development, where the whole purpose of it is to solve a human problem, sometimes is missing. So always start by analyzing the problem and understanding the problem you want to solve. And then later you are going to decide how you build it, and if it's micro-frontend or it's a monolith or it's modular, or it's like the important part is that you're effectively solving a problem. You have some requirements gathered, you understand what tools you have available, and then you move on to actually making something tangible. So the materialization of that solution as an
Love
application.
it. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Natalia, for your time, and
You're
I hope to
welcome.
see you in next conference, hopefully.
Yeah. I hope to meet you soon in person again. And yeah, great work, Lucas. Thank you so much for having
It's
me.
always a pleasure talking with you, as you know. And let's keep up with the good work on social, because you're doing
Yeah,
great
sure.
from my perspective. So thanks for sharing your insights. For
Thank
all
you.
the others, thank you for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed this session with Natalia, and see you in the next episode of MicroFrontends in the Trenches.
Bye
Bye.
bye.